The papers felt like fire in my hands. I stood in my empty kitchen at 2 a.m., fluorescent light buzzing overhead, staring at documents that bore my signature, a signature I'd never written. The property deed, the lease agreements, the sale contract, all bearing my name, all executed without my knowledge, all representing 13 years of theft disguised as family love. I know my legal options. I'm not seeking legal advice. I'm trying to decide if I really want to open this Pandora's box. The coffee had gone cold hours ago, but I couldn't bring myself to move. Couldn't think. Couldn't escape the crushing weight of a decision that would either free me or destroy what remained of my fractured family forever. Outside, October rain drummed against the windows like fingertips on a coffin lid, and I wondered if this was how justice always felt. Cold, lonely, and terrifyingly absolute. My phone buzzed. A text from my sister. Dad says you're being dramatic again. Just let it go. Dramatic. The word hit me like a physical blow, carrying with it the echo of 33 years of minimized pain, normalized cruelty, and gaslit reality. I set the phone down with trembling fingers and closed my eyes, letting the memories wash over me like a tide I could no longer hold back. I was 3 when I learned that love could sound like terror. The memory crystallizes in my mind with the brutal clarity that only childhood trauma can achieve. My parents screaming at each other in our cramped living room, their voices sharp as broken glass. Dad's hands, massive and scarred from construction work, are grabbing Mom's shoulders and shaking her like a rag doll. The sound of her sobbing. The slam of the front door. The silence that followed was thick and suffocating as smoke. Mommy, I had whispered into the empty house, my infant sister crying in her crib upstairs, but there was no answer. Just Dad, standing in the doorway with wild eyes and beer on his breath, looking at us like we were problems to be solved rather than children to be loved. That was my first lesson in powerlessness. By the time I turned 8, I could read his moods by the sound of his footsteps on the stairs after work. Heavy, deliberate thuds meant we had maybe 30 seconds to disappear. Quick, irregular steps meant he was drunk and dangerous. The measured pace of controlled rage meant someone was about to pay for whatever had gone wrong in his world that day. I became a conductor of chaos, orchestrating my siblings' survival. Take Sarah to her room. I would whisper to my 5-year-old brother. Lock the door. Don't come out until I say. I learned to absorb his anger like a sponge, to become the lightning rod that drew his fury away from them. I learned that love in our house meant sacrificing yourself so others could survive. The first time I saw my sister bleed, she was barely 6 years old. She had clogged the toilet, an accident, the kind every child makes. But in our house, accidents were crimes punishable by violence. Dad dragged her to the kitchen, his face purple with rage, and grabbed the slotted wooden spoon from the drawer. The one with the hole in the middle that he claimed hurt more because it cuts through the air faster. Hold still, he commanded, and my sister, trained in the art of survival, obeyed. The first strike landed across her tiny legs with a sound like a gunshot. She didn't scream. We learned early that screaming only made it worse, but tears streamed down her cheeks as he brought the spoon down again and again. I stood frozen in the doorway, watching my baby sister's skin split open, watching small droplets of blood appear on her pale legs like grotesque freckles. Please, Daddy, stop, I whispered, and his head snapped toward me. You want some too? I shook my head and fled, my sister's muffled sobs following me up the stairs. Later, I would help her clean the wounds with hydrogen peroxide, her small body shaking as I whispered apologies I shouldn't have had to make. It's okay, she said through her tears. Dad could have been worse. Even then, at 6 years old, she was learning to minimize her own pain. Even then, the poison of normalization was seeping into her bones. The construction sites were Dad's kingdom, and we were his unwilling subjects. From the time I could walk, he dragged us to job sites scattered across the county, massive, dangerous playgrounds of concrete, steel, and industrial machinery where children had no business being. Mom was always home or had access to discounted childcare through her work, but Dad claimed he needed us there. Looking back, I think he just enjoyed the power of it, the way other workers would look at him with a mixture of pity and disgust as he barked orders at children who should have been in school. My brother missed so many days of classes that the county threatened truancy charges. He was 12 when they pulled him out for entire weeks to help with roofing jobs, his small hands growing calloused and scarred as he learned to install shingles under the scorching summer sun. Dad never paid him fairly, maybe $20 for 14-hour days that would have earned an adult worker $200. It's character building, Dad would say when anyone questioned it, teaching him the value of hard work. But I knew the truth. It was child labor dressed up as life lessons, financial abuse disguised as parental wisdom. Sarah was 10 when the ballast fell. We were at an electrical job downtown, an office building renovation that stretched into its 6th month. Dad had forbidden us from playing near the equipment, but when you're a child trapped on a construction site for 10 hours, boredom becomes its own kind of danger. Sarah was sitting quietly under a scaffolding, reading a library book she'd smuggled in her backpack, when the metal ballast came loose from the ceiling fixture above. The sound it made hitting her forehead was like a melon dropping on concrete, wet and final and wrong. Blood poured from the gash above her eyebrow, streaming down her face as she sat stunned and silent. I screamed, but Dad's reaction wasn't to comfort her or rush her to a hospital. His first words were, "God damn it, Sarah, I told you to stay away from there." 3 staples in the emergency room. 3 pieces of metal holding together a scar she still carries today. The doctor asked questions, too many questions, about why children were unsupervised on an active construction site. Dad charmed his way through the explanation. All false smiles and accidents happen platitudes, but I saw the look in the doctor's eyes. Suspicion. Concern. The recognition of a pattern he'd probably seen too many times before. Nothing came of it, of course. Nothing ever did. The night the police came, I was 14 and tired of pretending everything was normal. It was July, sweltering and humid, the kind of night when tempers ran as hot as the asphalt. We'd been watching fireworks from our front yard, one of the few family traditions that Dad couldn't somehow weaponize, when my 8-year-old brother accidentally knocked over his soda on the blanket. Dad exploded. "You clumsy little shit," he roared, and before any of us could react, he was dragging the garden hose from the side of the house. The water was ice cold from sitting in the pipes all day, and he sprayed it directly at my brother, soaking him from head to toe as the child screamed and tried to run. "Please, Daddy, I'm sorry," my brother cried, but Dad just laughed, a sound more terrifying than his anger. "Maybe this'll teach you to pay attention." I couldn't watch anymore. Couldn't stand there and bear witness to another moment of cruelty disguised as discipline. While Dad was distracted, I slipped inside and dialed 911 with shaking fingers. "My father is abusing my little brother," I whispered into the phone. "Please send someone." The police arrived within minutes, their blue and red lights painting our neighborhood in alternating waves of authority and shame. Dad met them at the door with his practiced charm, all reasonable explanations and boys will be boys justifications, but I could see their skepticism growing as they took in my brother's soaked clothes and terrified expression. What I didn't tell them about was the handprint. Less than a month earlier, Dad had lost his temper over something equally trivial. Spilt milk at breakfast, maybe, or a forgotten chore, and struck my brother hard enough to leave a perfect outline of his palm across the child's shoulder blade. The bruise had lasted for days, purple and angry, a topographic map of violence that I helped conceal with careful clothing choices and strategic positioning. I should have told the officers about the handprint. Should have rolled up my brother's sleeve and shown them the evidence still fading from yellow to brown on his small back. But I was 14 and terrified and trained to protect the family's secrets, even as they were killing us from the inside. Instead, I answered their questions carefully, providing just enough truth to make them take the incident seriously without revealing the full scope of our reality. Dad was charged with unlawful neglect, a watered-down offense that carried all the legal weight of a parking ticket. DSS got involved after that, their social worker explaining to us children that Dad wasn't allowed around us while the case was pending. For 3 weeks, we lived in something approaching peace. No footsteps to fear. No eggshells to walk on. No explosions of rage that sent us scattering like startled birds. But Mom made her choice. "He's learned his lesson," she said, letting him back into the house despite the court order, despite the social worker's warnings, despite the risk of having us removed and placed in foster care. "We need to stick together as a family." I was old enough to understand what she was really saying. His presence was more important than our safety. His comfort mattered more than our protection. The preservation of our family unit, even a diseased, dysfunctional one, took precedence over everything else. That night, lying in my bed and listening to his familiar footsteps on the stairs, I felt something inside me break. Not the explosive fracture of sudden trauma, but the slow, grinding destruction of faith. The realization that the person who was supposed to protect us had chosen not to. That we were truly, completely alone. I was 15 when he made me complicit in my own exploitation. "I need you to sign some paperwork," Dad said one evening, spreading documents across the kitchen table with the casual air of someone discussing the weather. "Tax stuff. You're old enough now to help the family." The property deed was thick, official-looking, bound with a blue cover that made it seem important and legitimate. He explained it simply. Putting my name on the deed alongside Mom's would help them get better tax breaks from the state. In exchange, when I became financially responsible, his words, I could move into the property. It's an investment in your future, he said, his hand heavy on my shoulder. When you're ready to settle down, this place will be waiting for you. I was 15. I trusted him. Despite everything, despite the violence, despite the fear, despite the growing understanding that our family was broken in fundamental ways, I still believed that parents were supposed to want what was best for their children. I signed my name with careful cursive, the same signature I'd been practicing in school, and watched as he notarized the document with satisfaction gleaming in his eyes. 3 years later, when I graduated from high school, I reminded him of his promise. I had been working full-time while finishing my senior year, taking college classes at night, scraping together every dollar I could save. I was tired of living in chaos, tired of walking on eggshells, tired of being treated like a child when I was supporting myself more independently than most adults. I'm ready to move into the property now, I told him. I can handle the bills, the maintenance, everything. His expression shifted, the mask of paternal concern sliding away to reveal something cold and calculating underneath. That was just talk, he said dismissively. You didn't pay for the place. You don't get to live there. But my name is on the deed. Your name is on a lot of things. Doesn't mean you own them. That afternoon, he signed a lease agreement for the property, without my knowledge, without my consent, without even the courtesy of a phone call to inform me. The tenants he'd chosen were a young couple who paid $800 a month in rent, money that went directly into his pocket despite my legal co-ownership of the property. For 13 years, he collected rent on a property I legally owned but could never access. Conservative estimates put his profit at over $120,000, money that should have been split between him and me, money that could have changed the trajectory of my entire adult life. But more than the financial theft, more than the lost income, was the violation of identity itself. He had used my name, my signature, and my legal standing as a way to manipulate government systems and profit from the fraud. In a very real sense, he had stolen not just money but me, my credit, my identity, my ability to make independent financial decisions. When I tried to buy my first house at 25, the property showed up on my credit report as an asset, limiting my borrowing power and complicating the loan process. I still qualified for a conventional mortgage thanks to years of careful credit management, but it was a hurdle I should never have faced. A consequence of trust betrayed and promises broken. Every month for 13 years, tenants paid rent on a property I owned but couldn't touch. Every month for 13 years, he pocketed money that legally belonged to both of us. Every month for 13 years, I was reminded that even my own family saw me as a resource to be exploited rather than a person to be respected. The call came while I was traveling last weekend, my phone buzzing with a number I didn't recognize as I sat in an airport waiting for a delayed flight home. Is this regarding the property on Maple Street? The voice asked, professional and clipped. We're representing the buyers and need to confirm some details about the sale. My blood turned to ice. What sale? The sale contract your father submitted yesterday. Your signature is on the documents, so we assumed you were aware. I hung up without another word, my hands shaking so violently I could barely hold the phone. He was selling the property. Selling it without telling me, without asking me, without even the pretense of seeking my consent. And somehow, impossibly, my signature was on the sale documents. The realization hit me like a physical blow. He had forged my signature. Again. 13 years after the original fraud, he was still using my identity, my name, my legal standing to facilitate his schemes. The property that was legally half mine was being sold, and the profits would disappear into his pocket while I was left with nothing but the knowledge of my own powerlessness. I caught the first flight home, my mind racing through possibilities and consequences. This wasn't just financial abuse anymore. It was outright fraud, documented and witnessed by third parties. I had evidence now, real evidence that couldn't be dismissed or minimized or explained away. But even as I planned my next steps, I could hear my family's voices in my head. You're being dramatic. They did their best. Others had it worse. But they're your family. The last voice belonged to my sister, now 30 and still carrying the scars from that wooden spoon, defending the man who had beaten her until she bled because Dad could have been worse. The normalization was so complete, so thoroughly woven into the fabric of our family identity, that she genuinely couldn't see the violence for what it was. It would be easier to let it go. Easier to walk away, to write off the money and the property and the years of manipulation as the cost of keeping peace. Easier to accept my role as the family scapegoat, the one who absorbs the consequences so everyone else can maintain their comfortable illusions. But I couldn't. Not anymore. Everything changed when James died. My fiancé had been the first person to truly understand the scope of what I'd survived. When I told him about my childhood, about the fear and violence and systematic undermining of my reality, he didn't minimize it or suggest I was overreacting. He listened with the kind of quiet fury reserved for people who genuinely love you, not despite your wounds, but including them as part of the whole person he had chosen to protect. "They stole your childhood," he said one night as we lay in bed, my head on his chest and his fingers running through my hair. "They stole your sense of safety. They stole your ability to trust your own perceptions. And now they're stealing your money too. When is enough going to be enough?" James was the one who researched property law, who explained co-ownership rights, and who helped me understand that legal ownership meant something regardless of who had paid the initial costs. He was the one who encouraged me to set boundaries, to demand accountability, to stop accepting crumbs from people who owed me basic respect. "You don't owe them your silence," he would say when I wavered. "You don't owe them your compliance. You deserve better than this." When the cancer took him in March, sudden and vicious and completely without warning, I lost more than the man I planned to marry. I lost my everything. I lost my advocate, my witness, the one person who had validated my reality when the rest of the world told me I was crazy for wanting basic human decency from my own parents. The grief was overwhelming, but buried beneath it was something else, a terrible clarity about what he would want me to do. James had spent our last months together encouraging me to fight for myself, to stop accepting abuse as love, to recognize that being family didn't give someone the right to exploit and manipulate you. He wasn't here to stand up for me anymore, but I knew with absolute certainty that he wouldn't want me to tolerate continued mistreatment. He wouldn't want me to sacrifice my dignity, my financial security, my sense of self on the altar of false family harmony. In the months since his death, my tolerance for disrespect had plummeted to zero. Without his voice advocating for me, I had learned to advocate for myself. Without his protection, I had discovered my own strength. Without his presence to soften the edges of my anger, I had finally allowed myself to feel the full scope of my rage. 33 years of minimized abuse. 13 years of financial exploitation. A lifetime of being told I was too sensitive, too dramatic, too demanding, when all I wanted was to be treated like a human being deserving of basic respect. I was done. I hired a lawyer on Monday morning. Her office was sleek and professional, all polished wood and expensive leather that spoke of competence and success. Sarah Martinez, ESQ, reviewed my documents with the kind of calm precision that only comes from years of handling family disputes gone legal. "This is pretty straightforward," she said after an hour of reviewing deeds, lease agreements, and bank records. "You have clear legal ownership of the property. The rental income should have been split between you and your mother according to your ownership percentages. The sale cannot proceed without your written consent. And if I want to pursue criminal charges for the forged signatures?" She leaned back in her chair, studying my face. "That's a bigger question. Fraud charges could mean serious consequences for your father, potentially prison time. Are you prepared for that possibility?" I thought about my brother, pulled from school at 12 to work construction jobs for $20 a day. About Sarah, beaten until she bled at age 6 and still defending her abuser. About myself at 15, signing my name to documents I didn't understand because I trusted the man who was supposed to protect me. I thought about James, who had died believing I deserved better. I thought about the cycle of abuse that would continue until someone dared to stop it. "Yes," I said. "I'm prepared." The paperwork took 3 hours. Powers of attorney, criminal complaints, civil suits for financial damages, injunctions preventing the sale of the property. Every form, every signature, every legal maneuver designed to reclaim what had been stolen and prevent future theft. "Your family isn't going to be happy about this," the lawyer warned as I signed the last document. "My family hasn't been happy with me for 33 years, I replied. "At least now I'll have legal standing to match their disapproval." The phone started ringing before I even made it home from the lawyer's office. "First, Mom, how could you do this to your own father? After everything he's done for you?" Then my sister, "This is exactly the kind of dramatic bullshit we expected from you. Can't you just let it go?" Finally, my brother. Do you know how this is going to affect all of us? Why can't you think about someone other than yourself for once? I listened to each voicemail with the detached interest of an anthropologist studying a foreign culture. The themes were consistent. My selfishness, my ingratitude, my failure to understand that family loyalty meant accepting abuse without complaint. Not one of them addressed the actual issue. The fraud, the theft, the 13 years of financial exploitation. None of them seemed capable of acknowledging that I might have legitimate grievances. Dad didn't call. Dad showed up. I was making dinner when I heard his truck in the driveway, the diesel engine rumbling with familiar menace. Through the window, I watched him climb out slowly, his movements careful and deliberate. At 67, he was still physically imposing, 6 feet of weathered muscle and barely controlled rage, but age and alcohol had taken their toll. His face was flushed, his hands shaking slightly, his eyes holding that same wild look I remembered from childhood. He didn't knock. He never knocked. The front door opened with his key, a key he'd never returned despite me moving out 15 years ago, and his voice filled my house like poison gas. What the hell do you think you're doing? I turned from the stove slowly, forcing my voice to remain calm. I'm making dinner. You're trespassing. Trespassing. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. In a house I helped you buy, using the credit I helped you build? Everything you have is because of me. Everything I have is despite you, I corrected. And you helped me build credit by damaging it with fraudulent property records. You helped me buy a house by creating complications with my borrowing power. Your help has been a hindrance from day one. His face darkened. You ungrateful little bitch. After everything I've done for this family. You mean after everything you've done to this family? The words hung between us like a blade, sharp and final and impossible to take back. For 33 years, I had absorbed his anger, deflected his rage, accepted responsibility for his failures. For 33 years, I had played the role of the dutiful daughter who understood that love came with conditions, and those conditions included silent compliance with abuse. Not anymore. You beat Sarah until she bled when she was 6 years old. I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. You forced my brother to work construction jobs as a child, then stole his wages. You dragged us to dangerous job sites where we could have been seriously injured or killed. You put my name on legal documents when I was a minor, then used that to commit fraud for over a decade. You've stolen more than $100,000 from me while claiming I should be grateful for your generosity. I gave you a roof over your head. You gave us terror, I interrupted. You gave us anxiety. You gave us the kind of childhood trauma that takes decades of therapy to process. The roof over our heads came with the constant threat of violence. The food on our table was seasoned with fear. The clothes on our backs were bought with money stolen from child labor. He stepped toward me, and for a moment, I was 8 years old again, reading danger in his footsteps and preparing to absorb his rage. But I'm not 8 anymore. I'm 33, financially independent, legally protected, and finally done with being afraid. If you take another step toward me, I'm calling the police, I said calmly. If you don't leave my house in the next 60 seconds, I'm calling the police. If you contact me again without going through my lawyer, I'm calling the police. The days of you intimidating me are over. Something in my tone must have convinced him I meant it, because he stopped moving. For a long moment, we stared at each other across the kitchen that I had bought, in the house that I had earned, surrounded by the life that I had built without his help or his permission. You'll regret this, he said finally. I already regret it, I replied. I regret not doing it sooner. After he left, I sat in my living room and cried. Not from fear or sadness, but from relief so profound it felt like physical pain leaving my body. For the first time in my adult life, I had stood up to him completely. For the first time since childhood, I had refused to absorb his anger or accept responsibility for his actions. It felt like learning to breathe again after 33 years underwater. The legal process moved faster than I expected. Within 2 weeks, the attempted sale of the property was blocked by court order. Within a month, Dad was served with papers for both civil and criminal charges related to fraud and forgery. The rental income was placed in escrow pending resolution of the ownership dispute. My family's reaction was swift and predictable. I was cut off completely. No more Christmas invitations. No more family gatherings. No more pretense that I was anything other than a traitor who had chosen legal action over family loyalty. The silence should have hurt more than it did, but mostly I felt relief. For the first time in my life, I wasn't walking on eggshells. I wasn't monitoring my words for potential triggers. Wasn't accepting abuse disguised as love or manipulation, dressed up as family concern. My siblings made their positions clear through mutual friends and social media posts that pointedly excluded me. Sarah shared articles about forgiveness and family healing, with captions about people who hold grudges and can't let the past go. My brother posted photos from a family barbecue I hadn't been invited to, everyone smiling and looking happy without the dramatic sister to complicate their narrative. They had chosen Dad. Chosen the familiar dysfunction over the uncomfortable truth. I chose the version of reality where I was the problem, and he was the misunderstood victim of an ungrateful daughter's spite. I understood their choice, even as it broke my heart. It's easier to blame one person than to confront the systemic dysfunction that shaped all of our lives. It's easier to maintain the illusion of a loving family than to acknowledge that love and abuse had been so thoroughly intertwined in our household that we couldn't tell the difference. But understanding their choice didn't make it less painful. It didn't fill the empty chair at my birthday dinner or the silence on holidays that used to be filled with complicated but familiar family chaos. The criminal case against Dad was resolved with a plea bargain 6 months later. Fraud charges were reduced to financial misconduct, and he received 2 years of probation plus restitution requirements. Not the prison time my lawyer had warned was possible, but enough legal consequences to make the fraud official and documented. The civil case was more satisfying. The court ruled that I was entitled to half of all rental income generated since my 18th birthday, plus interest and legal fees. The property itself was ordered sold, with proceeds split according to our legal ownership percentages. Dad paid me $73,000 in back rent and legal damages. Not the full amount he'd stolen over 13 years, but enough to validate my decision and fund my future independence. The property sold for more than expected, netting me an additional $45,000. With that money, I paid off my mortgage, established a solid emergency fund, and started a scholarship program for kids from abusive homes who want to attend college. If my pain could help even one person escape the cycle that had trapped my family, then maybe it hadn't all been for nothing. 2 years after filing the lawsuit, I sit in my house on a quiet Thursday evening, reading a book that James would have loved while rain patters against the windows. My phone doesn't ring with family drama. My mailbox doesn't contain demands or manipulations. My front door stays locked because I control who enters my space. The silence isn't empty anymore. It's peaceful. I have friends who understand that family doesn't automatically deserve forgiveness, that blood relations don't excuse abuse, that protecting yourself isn't selfish when the alternative is continued exploitation. I have a therapist who validates my reality instead of questioning it. I have a life built on my own terms, funded by my own work, shaped by my own choices. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder about my siblings. Whether Sarah still defends Dad's violence as not that bad. Whether my brother still believes that family loyalty requires accepting abuse. Whether either of them will ever be able to see our childhood clearly enough to protect their own children from repeating the cycle. I hope they find peace, even if they can't find truth. I hope Dad finds help for the alcoholism and rage that have defined his relationships with everyone who should have mattered to him. I hope Mom finds the courage to leave him before he destroys what's left of her health and sanity. But mostly, I try not to hope for things I can't control. I focus on the choices I can make, the boundaries I can maintain, the life I can build from the ashes of the family that taught me love and pain were synonyms. James was right. I deserve better than this. It took me 33 years to believe him, 2 years to enforce that belief legally, and every day since to maintain the boundaries that keep me safe from people who believe that sharing DNA gives them the right to exploit my resources, manipulate my emotions, and minimize my pain. The little girl who learned to read danger in footsteps grew up to be a woman who refuses to live in fear. The teenager who signed documents she didn't understand grew up to be an adult who reads every contract twice and trusts her own judgment over anyone else's promises. The daughter who absorbed abuse to protect her siblings grew up to be a person who understands that you can't save people from themselves, but you can absolutely save yourself from them. I am 35 years old. I own my house, control my finances, and choose my relationships based on mutual respect rather than biological obligation. My legal name appears only on documents I have signed, for purposes I have approved, in service of goals that benefit me. My identity belongs to me now. And that, more than any amount of money or property or legal vindication, is the real victory. The knowledge that I broke the cycle not just for myself, but for any children I might have someday. The knowledge that abuse stops with me, that manipulation ends at my boundaries, that the next generation will inherit healing instead of harm. I am not the asshole for choosing my own well-being over their comfort. I am not the villain for demanding basic human decency from the people who claim to love me. I am not the problem with refusing to accept abuse as proof of affection. I am the solution. And tonight, for the first time in 35 years, that feels like enough.